let's get into the other Phantom of the Opera musical. The one your community theater's probably done. Because hello, I'm Jessica, I write Phantom books. I'm talking about a different version of the Phantom of the Opera every day in October. It's called Phantober. Today's topic is Phantom, the American musical sensation. I think sensation might be a strong word here. The story of how it came to be is pretty interesting. So in the early 80s, Murray Yeston and Arthur Kopit had success with the musical Nine. They were approached by a guy named Geoffrey Holder who had the rights to the Phantom of the Opera in America. See, Phantom's rights had already lapsed in the UK. That's why Ken Hill was able to mount a production of his Phantom in the early 80s. But Holder held the rights until the end of 1987. They figured Ken Hill was doing his thing over in England, but they would be fine over in the US. So Yeston and Kopit wrote their version of Phantom. And they also decided to make it more of a love story and give the Phantom much more of a backstory, even though they changed a lot from the original LaRue. Everything looked like it was going to be great until this happened. Andrew Lloyd Webber opened his version of the Phantom of the Opera in 1986, and it was an immediate sensation. At this point, Yeston and Kopit had already started getting investors for their Broadway version of Phantom. But once the Phantom of the Opera decided to take on Broadway, their investors started pulling out. They did have a little bit of hope when there was conflict between Lloyd Webber and the Actors Equity Union in the US because he wanted to bring over the entire UK cast and they wanted US actors. But that got resolved. Webber's Phantom opened in January of 1988 as soon as it legally could, and Phantom was in the public domain in the US, which left Yeston and Kopit kind of screwed. But they didn't give up. Arthur Kopit started writing TV miniseries, and then in 1990 he sold a script for The Phantom of the Opera. It didn't have any of the music, it was just the same story from the musical he never got to produce. But this was cashing in on the now hugely successful Lloyd Webber Phantom, which allowed them to mount a production of Phantom in Texas. They even released a cast recording with Richard White, who played Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. Phantom is sometimes called one of the most successful musicals to never get on Broadway. But that's because for decades, no one in the community theaters could do this version of Phantom. No one could get the rights to it. So people who wanted to produce a version of Phantom that was cheap did this one. And it was done in community theaters all over the country. And sometimes people would go thinking they were seeing the Lloyd Webber version and get disappointed that it wasn't. It's had like 1,000 different productions. It's famously been done by the all-female Takarazuka Revue in Japan, which of course used the Lloyd Webber style half mask. Same thing also for Phantom, which was a Korean version of this, which was filmed and released. Now, Phantom isn't a knockoff. It was developed independently from Lloyd Webber's, and then screwed over by Lord Andrew. But since then, it's continued to cash in on his Phantom success. It's not a bad show, but personally, I wouldn't call it a great show. It's certainly not great the way Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom is great. It doesn't have the same scale and intensity, but in exchange for that, it has more intimacy and more characterization for the Phantom, which I appreciate. I like their version of Eric. He influenced mine a lot, so did the movie, which I think we'll talk about tomorrow when Phantober continues. Check out the rest of the playlist and make sure you're following along. Bye!